So everybody can start with the opening verse. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely met even 100,000 billion kalpas. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. I'd like to welcome Master Leandra Robertshaw to speak today. And it's a great honor and a privilege to make this connection over the seas. Master Leandra Robertshaw is transmitted in the lineage of Ho'un Ajiu Kennett, who founded Shasta Abbey in 1978. And Master Robertshaw grew up in Africa and gave up her practice as a psychotherapist to actually devote her life and dedicate her life to Soto Zen. In 2018, Master Robertshaw ascended the mountain seat and now is the Abbot of Throssel Hole Buddhist Abbey in northern England. And this connection with Master Robertshaw kind of unfolded organically, and she read a book of Joksho Kwong Roshi's No Beginning, No End, and was inspired to make this connection. So she came up here, I believe 2 or 3 years ago, and stayed with us with one of her students for a couple of days, and we were able to make this connection. Over the past 2 or 3 years, she's continued to make this connection with Kwong Roshi and Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, and has been very kind of sending us words and concerns during the fires and epidemic. So I would like to welcome Master Leandra Robertshaw from Throssel Hole Buddhist Abbey. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Reverend Roland, who's here with me doing the technical stuff, said I should let you know that it's dark here because it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and it's a very windy, wet day. So if you hear a patter of raindrops or wind, it will be on the windows of this ceremony hall. And I keep hoping, Nyose, that you and Kashin will come here one day. Instead of just stopping at Heathrow, you will come to Throssel. It's not always wet and windy, and it would be a great joy to have you here, and anybody else in your congregation. So there look some familiar faces, but I am really delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just very touched. I don't know how these things happen, but the connection I feel with Sonoma Mountain Zen Center is very important to me. It feels very deep. Last month, at the time of the Autumn Equinox, we offered our week-long Segaki session on Zoom, of course, which meant some of the Sangha were able to join us, who in the past could not have made it. For instance, someone who lives in Tasmania. And, some of our congregation are getting a lot older, not very well, and I think for them, they hope that we'll always go on doing Zoom. I suspect we will in some way, but I think there's something very special about actually being able to go to a monastery, and I hope that will come in due course. Well, because it was Segaki, and because death and grief seem particularly relevant given COVID pandemic, and the Hungry Ghost ceremonies are of course about death too. So here's what seems a pertinent question. Have your attitudes to life and death changed this year of the pandemic? Some say their commitment to practice has deepened, but for some the challenge of fear has led them away from sitting regularly, and that's a great sadness. I'm sure I'm not alone in wondering, asking myself what the purpose of human life is. How about you? Just spend a moment thinking about how the pandemic has affected you, and how, again, there was that miracle of the wildfires coming so close to your precious temple, and somehow the presence of Suzuki Roshi is very strong in your temple, and the fire didn't overwhelm you. I'm so grateful to the Buddhas and ancestors that that sort of thing can happen. You've probably heard from or about people who haven't been able to be beside their loved ones when they were dying. And we currently, one of our older monks is in a care home, and at the moment he can't be visited. But the care manager is a very kind and insightful person, and she will allow at least one of us to be there when he's dying. And she's seen a lot of deaths, so she knows it's getting closer. But when people aren't able to be with their loved ones, they speak of their intense grief. So intense it feels like torture. And then for them the question arises, why have I been spared? I surely can't be dependent on being a good person or having lived an honourable life, for we all die. As some of you probably know, Uchiyama wrote, "At the end of aging, we can see that life-death is one life, not life and death. Life-death is undivided." And the way he uses this one word, life-death, reminded me of a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet. "I am dead, thou livest. Draw thy breath in pain to tell my story." And some of those stories are wonderful. People who work in palliative care and write about it. It is amazing how people, luckily many people, die in peace. but of course not all. And I was just thinking of my parents. Their wish that what they wanted was to die together. And they decided to go back to Africa and hope the plane might crash and they would both die. Well, the plane didn't crash, and they didn't stay that long in Africa, although that's where they were both born. I felt they wanted to return. They came back to the UK because they found that they were missing their children and their grandchildren. And that's, for me, a very good story, that what proved more important than returning to their homeland was the interconnection and love for their family. I don't know if any of you are interested in poetry, but something that Mary Oliver wrote recently, in a very open, personal way, of what it is to be human, of what it is to love another human being, caught my attention. She wrote, "To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing that your own life depends on it, and, when the time comes, to let it go." And this letting go is demanding, I think, for all of us in many, many aspects of our life. And although we all know death's a natural part of life, we can't avoid grief if we truly love other beings, if we truly love our world. Grief is a universal emotion, and those left behind must learn to adjust to a new life without their loved ones. Have you ever been with someone who is dying? And what's the ultimate relationship with someone who is dying? Does death end a relationship? I'm not so sure it does. Is there room in our hearts to bear the pain that comes from the death, both of those well known to us personally and those we only know through what we have heard of how they lived their lives? Death can feel unbearable. Grief can feel unbearable. Yet sorrow is a natural part of life, and we all know from experience that our attempts to escape the inevitability of sorrow never works. It causes us more suffering. Suffering seems to come from our chronic restlessness, which resists life as it is. We, like all living organisms, desire to survive. This has been hardwired into us over millions of years of evolution. So what? There seems to me nothing left to do but surrender to the truth of being. Let go into the truth that nothing can be relied on, that there is no one thing in the universe that lasts forever. However, to contradict myself, there does seem to be something left. I call it a groundless ground, which is the emptiness that pervades the fullness of things. Empty to the brim, still to the core. Does that make sense? Empty to the brim. We are welcomed into the spacious, vast expanse. Here we can bear our grief and fear. Learn not to turn away. In doing so, we find pieces of our lives that we ourselves had forgotten. Sometimes it is in dreams that we are reminded. In the tangled web of loss and sorrow, can you find words for your grief and for the fear of your own death? What we cannot avoid is the bones of loss showing through. Dying people may still be grieving for all they will lose, but for most there comes a stage when they let go and die at peace. May we all be so blessed. Caregivers of the dying can stay in step with the dying and attentively observe and encourage the letting go. A good caregiver learns to watch the loss of choice for the dying person and may wonder how they themselves will be in a similar situation. In our culture, we are conditioned to possess, not to let go. This applies to relationships as well as to material possessions. And let's not forget our clinging to our opinions and beliefs, how that can tangle us up when we are longing to be free. Fear of loss, particularly perhaps loss of control, may be what brought many of us to meditation in the first place. It's not uncommon for there to be both fear of death and fear of life. Learn not to deny such fears, but to turn towards them so that you can fall willingly into our beautiful, tender world that we are, unfortunately, beginning to destroy. We accept it just as it is, and there is an imperative to do something for the good of our universe and for the good of all beings. Don't ignore the amazing refuge of meditation, which can show us how to look forward to each day, each moment, even to look forward to our own death. I don't mean looking forward in a suicidal, morbid way, but looking forward with interest and without expectation. I remember that so clearly with one of our congregation who was in a hospice. He was sort of excited almost about what is this death going to be like. How can we know how our own death will be like? I think we need to let go of any notions, for instance, as to what a good death is. That can really tie us up in knots. I see a nice baby jumping about there. So let's try and set aside expectations of how we should be when we are dying. Let's really trust ourselves. Let's approach death with an open heart that does not need there to be something we feel has to happen to make life and the prospect of death bearable. No matter what may happen to you, you can be at ease within the unborn, the undying, the uncreated. Aren't we fortunate to have stumbled into Buddhist practice? Things are always getting broken and mended and broken again, and there is something that never breaks. Everything rises and falls, and yet, in exactly the same moment, things are eternal and go nowhere at all. You might have read what Ram Dass said when he was dying. How you relate to death is key spiritual work, and how you see death is a function of how much you identify with that which dies. Encourage yourself to make peace with death, to see it as the culminating event of this adventure called life. Death is not an error. It is not a failure. If you live fully in the present, death is just another moment. So let's give up hope of having things our way. Let's encourage ourselves to stick with ourselves, to make friends with ourselves, to not run away, returning somehow to the bare bones, no matter what is going on. Fear of death seems to be in the background of many things. It seems to make us restless, make us panic, make us fear anxiety. But if we totally experience hopelessness, giving up all hope of alternatives to the present moment, we can have a joyful relationship with our lives, an honest, direct relationship, one that no longer ignores the reality of impermanence and death. As life unfolds, we are offered the opportunity to get used to losing things. This opens us up to the realization that nothing needs to be replaced. There really was no thing, no Dharma, from the first, and thus there is no thing we ever owned and must retain possession of. We become able to loosen our fierce grip on grasping onto anything, realizing that the reality is that there is nothing from the first. We find, to our astonishment, that we can open our hands and let everything fall away. As a consequence, we can find ourselves more able to rest at peace. And there is still sorrow at any loss of the small self's desire. The small self is tempted to invent barriers and bulwarks against unwelcome change. But we all know this is a hiding to nothing, for change, impermanence, is reality itself. Keep returning to the truth of being. We may temporarily, I don't know about you, but it seems to apply to me, make our peace with this reality while not acknowledging that we are still deceiving ourselves with the thought that things will eventually return to the way they were. But impermanence is not negotiable. Though we may continue to see the small, frightened, confused self struggling to maintain its being, our attitudes to life and death are beginning to change. As this occurs, there is a form of useful dislocation before another series of small selfness is re-established. Hopefully, this re-established small self is more in tune with the task of penetrating the reality of continuous impermanence rather than fighting against it. Impermanence is always unpleasant for the small self, for its nature is to continue to struggle to protect itself from annihilation. We blindly assume that we are in control of our life. Well, nobody else really wants to look out for us, so we have to do it for ourselves. However, the ultimate truth is that our life is controlled by the elements of earth, fire, water, and air. These elements were here long before us. They are just impersonally following their nature. We are the ones in the way. We can't deny seasonal change. Summer has definitely become autumn, and winter begins to peek ahead. One of Sigaki's offerings of teaching is that it takes place at the autumn equinox. It is a time of undeniable change. Some love autumn for its brilliant display of autumnal colours. Some dread it as they find themselves thinking of the cold of winter and their aching bones. Those SAD people suffering from seasonal affective disorder are anxious about becoming depressed again in spite of their special light sources. But there is a joy. Although change constantly unravels what we know, it also ties us together. We live in spiritual community, and I mean not only the community of monks, but all those around us. And here we share one life, not many lives, not many disparate lives. Thus we make the effort to nourish the whole community and not merely ourselves. It is likely that those who have died in peace have also lived in peace. They have found how to live in the present moment, realizing the past has already gone and the future is not yet here. When you arrive in the present moment, there is sufficiency, because you have stopped confusing yourself about your true life by running about within or without. This requires dropping the belief that you have to get somewhere else to be happy, contented and fulfilled. Rather than trying to go to the future, you live right here, now, in this. Then there is body, mind, grounded in your life and in your death. Here's a question. Can you accept grief and fear as gifts? They teach us how to live meaningful lives. They teach us gratitude for all we have been given, and help us to untangle the fear of losing everything, as we acknowledge that at death all is taken away. There is a beauty in knowing that everything is taken away, all that we held dear will eventually slip through our fingers. And as Dogen said in the Shoshoki, the kingdom of death must be entered by ourselves alone, with nothing for company but our own good and bad karma. Realizing the Dharma, which is the path to freedom from the round of birth and death, is a task we all have to do, and in a way we do it alone, although there's always the encouragement of other practitioners. Put down again and again everything that lacks a real abiding substance. This is your own work, nobody else's. Leave it to others, trust them to do their own work. Our sole responsibility when we are dying is to focus our mind from wandering about and bring it to peace. Leave it to others to do the same when their time for dying comes. We are given lessons in how to swim in the stream of unwavering sorrow without drowning. We acknowledge and embrace the interconnection inherent in the universality of impermanence as it reveals itself. We find we can allow ourselves to become grounded in cherishing what is here and now, and appreciating what rises to take its place. I used to be grateful as I delighted in the appearance of joy. Now joy still appears, but it has a quieter presence that comes from a deeper sense of the unchanging, uncreated, unborn. Such joy, or the term sufficiency, which our retired Abbot, Rev. Master Daishin, uses, is able to naturally sit side by side with grief, loneliness, and fear. He writes, "There is a sufficiency at the heart of life, and in awakening to it, life finds its fulfillment." Something I've been considering recently, and ask you to consider it with me, is that the insight of impermanence also requires the insight of permanence. Allow the insight of permanence to burn away a superficial insight into impermanence. It doesn't look like it, but maybe I can imagine you responding, "Oh, yeah, I understand about change, so don't hark on about it quite so much." Here is something that Dogen Zenji wrote about in Koan 24 from his Shinjin Shobogenzo. One day, a monk asked Master Daisui Hoshin, "When the eternal fire comes and all 3,000 worlds are being destroyed, will this world also be destroyed?" Master Daisui said, "It will be destroyed." The monk said, "If this is true, I would like to follow circumstances." Daisui, "Yes, we should follow circumstances." What does following circumstances mean to you? Does it mean accepting them and being grateful for them, rather than fighting against them? It's about not getting free of the world, but being free in the world. Catch yourself if you notice despair arising and you find yourself thinking, well, what's the point of devoting myself to Buddhist practice if this world is to be destroyed? I might as well give up and lead as self-indulgent a life as I can, without concern for others. I don't expect any of us will have that even occur to us, but if it does, it will be very momentary. Rather than this, hold in your heart the truth that the ultimate is no attachment to any view. Differences between people are natural, but when we start attaching value to the differences, we open the door to heartache. The ultimate has no views. Nirvana is the removal of views. So that's probably more than enough from me. If anybody has any questions or comments, please go ahead.
Joseph,
Okay. Meva merit of this penetrate into each thing and all places, so that we, with all sentient beings, together realize the Buddha way. So everyone can do 3 bows, please. Put your hands in Gasho. Thank you, Master Leandra.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. I feel very honored, and I do value the connection. How these things happen in particular ways, I don't know, but it is very precious to me. And it's not only the Kwongs who are welcome here. If any of you happen to be in the UK and can bear the northern weather, which is often very windy and rather wet, we would be delighted to see you here.
Yeah.
And some of you look a lot younger than me, and so it's easier for you to travel here than me to travel to see you again. But I hope both directions are possible.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.